Hi, I'm Stan Pierre-Louis, President and CEO of the Entertainment Software Association. The ESA serves as the voice and advocate for the US video game industry. Today's discussion will focus on the role of science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, known as STEAM, in creating educational and career opportunities. Since video games bring together technological innovation and artistic excellence, the Games for Change Festival provides the perfect backdrop for this discussion. We have two extraordinary panelists for this conversation. Chris Rush, who joined the Biden administration in February as the Director of Educational Technology in the Office of the Secretary of the US Department of Education, and Layla Shabir, the co-founder and CEO of Girls Make Games. I will get to their bios in a moment. Currently, 1 in 3 people around the world play video games. And as we will be unveiling today on our website in our new Essential Facts report, there are nearly 227 million people in the United States who play video games. That's about 68% of the US population, and that's up from 214 million last year. We'll also be reporting that about 2/3 of US adults play games, as do 76% of those under 18. In fact, 80% of players are over 18. The average age of a player in the United States is about 31 years old. And across all ages, players are about half female and half male, about 45% female and 55% male, respectively. But beyond these statistics, we've seen that video games have the power to transcend culture, background, and geography to bring us together to share in a common experience. They also help develop critical skills that contribute to our national and global economy and create new opportunities into the workforce. In essence, video games can serve as a gateway to educational advancement and to a number of career paths. They're also quite fun. Today's panelists are champions of innovation in education. They bring different perspectives on how to advance these goals, but each in their own right, making an enormous impact. As noted earlier, Chris Rush is the Director of Educational Technology in the US Department of Education. Prior to joining the Biden administration, he spent more than a decade working to improve the delivery of education to students at every level. He's been a school teacher. He's worked on education policy in city government. He started educational nonprofits, and he's founded ed tech companies, including one that was named Time Magazine's Top 50 Innovations. My personal favorite is in 2010, he appeared in episode 5 of Freakonomics, the podcast, to talk about education reforms in the New York City Public School District. Chris's current role will help shape the federal government's efforts to support educators in advancing educational equity. Layla Shabir is the co-founder and CEO of Girls Make Games. Layla was born in Pakistan, raised in the United Arab Emirates, and a graduate of MIT. Her pathway to Girls Make Games is an interesting one that speaks to her commitment to giving back while looking to build the next generation of innovators. What's interesting about her is that she never set out to be in the video game space. However, as she saw the power of games and their positive impact on learning, especially with young girls, she realized a connection between education and video games, and one that needed to be formed. Among her other accolades, she's received the Visionary Award from the ESA Foundation. Layla has set a personal goal to teach 1 million girls how to make games through her work. Welcome to each of you. Chris, let me start with you. Throughout your career, you have spearheaded large-scale initiatives to transform education through technology. Based on those experiences, what have you found works best in advancing educational outcomes through technology? What works best for students, and what really improves how schools meet student needs?
Well, I just want to start off by saying it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to this panel conversation. But as far as your initial question, as far as what works, I think from a process standpoint, those who go in with a new innovation or a new offering and they think they've nailed it are almost always wrong. Not because they're not on to something, but because there are so many unique situations that are occurring in school that you really need to adapt. So you need to go in with a clear question and understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish, and be totally open to the way that the answer of how you're going about doing it isn't perfect and therefore needs to adjust. So it's unlike trying to build a building or a house where you lay out the plans and the blueprints, you know the electrical is going to go in and then the plumbing goes in, and it's all very orderly. It's okay that innovating in education technology is very iterative, even more so than the broader sort of Silicon Valley general tech space, because there's such a human component to what's happening in this particular space. So many people think about ed tech similarly to the way they think of things like Netflix or Spotify or Uber, which really are sort of on these 2 or 3 year cycles. But I find it's much more akin to innovation in healthcare or pharmaceuticals, which works much more on a longer time horizon. Sometimes the average time it takes for a drug to go from concept to market is about 14 years in pharmaceuticals. And the reason for that is not because of all the science that needs to happen behind it, because you need to work with people. You need to change behavior and practice. And in doing that, it doesn't go as quickly as it does when you're just dealing with the technical. And therefore, that's really important, because when we're doing this work, we're working with real students, we're working with real teachers, we're working with real communities. And we need to be respectful and not reckless in the things that we're doing. So that'd be my first thought. And then I have one more I'd like to share, which is really understanding what stage you're at and whatever it is you are trying to create and put into practice. So many times we make the mistake of thinking that a new idea is ready to scale right away. And the reality is it might need to go through one of 3 stages. So I think the first stage is really trying to work the problem, be clear on what it is you're trying to solve, and come up with solutions. The second stage is building out that solution and doing the right research and validation to make sure that that works. And then the third stage is scaling that and driving adoption. And so often we try to skip the first 2 stages and just go right to the research to see whether or not it works, or just try to go right to scaling it. And that happens with some of the grants that are put out, even by the federal government. Sometimes it happens with philanthropy and the grants they put out. Sometimes it happens with private investors that want to see something scale at a certain speed. And the reality of this is you need to understand where you are in order to get this right, so we don't burn a bunch of good ideas before they are ready to go out of the gate. But at the same time, act with a sense of urgency and being deliberate about where you are and getting these things out.
I wonder if I might unpack a little bit of what you just said, because it was really interesting about making sure you get to scale in the right way, but not rushing it. It seems like a lot of the work you've done in this space does involve seeing the impact that it has on students and iterating sometimes in real time to ensure that you're getting to the right place. How do you ensure that you're not trying to force a result in trying to shape it, but understanding that when it's iterative, it may end up in a different place? You may have gotten funding to do it a certain way, but now the process is taking you down a different path. How do you ensure that it's still meeting that goal of ensuring educational advancement for students?
Well, I think there's a few different audiences for that. One is to your question about, you may have gotten a certain grant from philanthropy and to do it a certain way. And I think the thing that I have a history of pushing back on philanthropy about is not the how, but the what. Let's make sure we're keeping our eye on what we want to see happen. And therefore, if it turns out how we're going to get there, we've learned from working with students and working with teachers, that's a win. That's not a failure. That's a success. And there are times where you might need to change that goal. But if so, let's have that conversation. But going to the same goal a different way, I think of it akin to if you're traveling on the highway and you hit a traffic jam and you get rerouted on GPS and you still get there, that's a win. That's success. And helping people understand that is important. Secondly, if you just insist on doing it your way, you can sort of fake it for a little bit. But I don't know about you, but if you've tried to put innovations into classrooms, no matter how strongly you push, if it is something that's not actually working for kids or working for teachers, there is no chance of getting them to continue to use that and adopt it. They might say they are and close their door, but the beauty with ed tech is that you can collect data along the way. You can see whether or not there's true engagement. And I think that's one of the beauties, especially when you get to gaming online, because you can see what folks are engaging with, what they're not engaging with, and you sort of can't fake it. And I think that's really good for students. I think that's really good for what we need to do to innovate within this space.
So as I noted earlier, you joined the Biden administration this past February. And so you're taking all the learning you've had in city government and nonprofit world and in the startup world to this national stage. And I thought maybe you could share with us, what are some of your key priorities as a member of the administration in trying to reach those educational outcomes and working through technology? And if you want to touch on the impact of COVID, that's great too, because obviously there have been a lot of issues with students falling behind, and how can technology help? So maybe you might first talk about the key priorities, and then to the extent that the pandemic's impacted some of that, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, priority number 1, 2, and 3 is to figure out how to get students back into the classroom where it makes sense. We really believe that every student should have access to in-person schooling 5 days a week. But it doesn't mean that ed tech needs to end there and that it's just back to business as usual. I think ed tech has a role in the classroom to really sort of expand what's happening, and outside of the classroom to extend that day. And there are places in the country where everyone may not be ready to go back into the classroom. There may be health concerns that folks have. There may be certain rural situations. We're seeing certain spikes with the Delta variant that's happening here, in which case, making sure that where we can get kids back in the classroom, we will. And where they need to be out of the classroom, they are best supported. So you've seen not only that message come out from the administration, but you've also seen a real push on the infrastructure front to really try to continue to close the digital access divide, to make sure that people can get online to be able to do the work that they need to, whether or not it's an extension of the school day or whether or not it's some continuation of remote learning. And right now, we have sort of lost, going on 20 months of time here. And when I say we've lost that time, the truth is, for some, they've actually excelled in this new environment and situation. And in others, they have really been absent from it. The reality is we don't know who's in which situation, and we need to get folks back in place in order to be able to tackle that. Now, once we get through that, once we can sort of hopefully stick this landing coming out of the pandemic and the reopening and get through the start of school in the fall, I think then there's lots of things that we hope to see happen, really around accelerating learning in particular. I don't think accelerating learning should just be trying to make up for this lost time. Let's not pretend that it was only starting with the pandemic that students weren't able to actually catch up or keep pace or falling behind, and that has huge impacts on their projected life outcomes and their situations and circumstances. And we need to tackle that. So even if you do fall behind at some point, or if you're ahead, that there are opportunities. I look at education in a way where if I make it akin to healthcare again, when something happens, if I've broken my leg, let's say, I might have a minor fracture that I need to sort of be on crutches for 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and it's no big deal. Or I might have shattered my leg, and therefore it's going to be a multi-year journey. But what I expect to happen when I go into a doctor's office is that there is a plan for me. There's a plan for success to get to where I need to get to. And I think the same thing needs to be true in schools. I should be able to go into a school regardless of my circumstances, whether I'm ahead or behind or whatever else is going on. And there should be a plan that's able to be put in place so that I will ultimately be successful. And it might be shorter for some and longer for others, but there should be a plan for success. And I think there's nothing stopping that other than our ability to shift policy and create innovations that make that happen.
I think that's really spot on. And Layla, maybe I'll turn to you a little bit to talk about a lot of those ideas and how they relate in the video game space in particular, given the work that you do. We've seen quite a bit of investment in education by the video game industry, and in particular to these STEAM education programs. And I know, for example, ESA announced earlier this year a partnership with Black Girls Code in bringing mentoring, teaching, and speaking engagements to the participants in those programs. We saw the really generous gift by Take-Two to University of Southern California in endowing scholarships for Black and Indigenous students in the video game space. A lot of your work really looks at that K through 12 and ensuring that we have opportunities for young girls as they develop into the innovators of tomorrow. You've been a prominent leader and voice in creating these STEAM opportunities. I wonder if you talk a little bit about your passion for this and why it's so important in shaping the workforce of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stan, for having me. So excited to be on this panel. And I love everything that Chris has said. I love the work that you've been doing. I've kind of been following it for a little bit of time. So it's really nice to be on this panel with you. So to talk a little bit about what we do at Girls Make Games, we run summer camps and workshops. So it's really more of an enrichment program. It's meets the kids where they are. They love video games. We want to give them an environment where they can thrive with something they're already passionate about and take them from, consumers of games to developers or creators of games. And if you abstract that idea, really, it's not necessarily about the games industry itself. It's about kids becoming empowered with the technology that they interact with every day. So we live in a world where we're constantly surrounded by information and all of these new gadgets and innovations coming our way. And we're very comfortable using them, but a lot of times we're not thinking about how to create. And I think that's where Girls Make Games does a good job, is introduces the girls to, you have an idea, you have a story, here's a game you liked playing, but maybe you wanted to change something about it. So a lot of kids will come in and be like, I love Minecraft, but I wish it was pink instead of green or yellow or whatever. And I'm like, that's game development. A lot of art is inspired. So you're not necessarily copying anything. If you end up making this, it's inspired creation that's yours. And it's so important, I think, to combine that love for technology and gaming and creating with instilling that confidence and giving them that space where they can see peers who are just like themselves. Because, a lot of times the kids will come in and they'll see a room full of girls and be like, I had no idea there were so many other girls who were just like me. In my robotics class, I'm the only girl. And it's incredibly empowering to walk out of camp and be like, I just met a group of girls that I'm probably going to be seeing in a few years. We'll go to college together. We'll get jobs together. Girls Make Games was born in 2014. It was essentially a social experiment that, I really just wanted to see what kind of games girls were playing, because at that time I was making my own educational video game, which is still not out. But they kind of, at the end of camp, showed me how important this space was for them. Like you said earlier, I never really set out to do any of this work. I was passionate about education. I wanted to become a professor. Didn't really play games as an adult. I played as a kid. I had an Atari I was obsessed with, but I think around high school time, and this is a very common thread we see with teen girls, is I played in elementary and middle. And in high school, I had to get serious about life. So I had to look at college and I just moved games out of my life because they're meant to be just fun. So at camp, I think we kind of bring them back to it. The way I came back to games was by seeing the power of the medium. This is not just entertainment. We think of games and we think of the stereotypes associated with games, and it's very unfortunate because it keeps a lot of great thinkers and problem solvers out of our industry. And I think if we can kind of expand that image of gaming as a medium that can influence people, because look at the numbers, there's 9 out of 10 kids playing games. There's hundreds of millions of Americans and people worldwide playing video games. We could do so much. We could tackle climate change. We could bring social change. We could help build empathy. This is a powerful medium that people go to. It doesn't even have to come to you. You don't have to create social media campaigns around it. People are already playing games. So it really just comes down to that pipeline. And our job at Girls Make Games is to show girls that this medium can do whatever you want it to do. You don't have to make games that are just for fun. If you're passionate about healthcare, you can make a game that helps people eat healthy, for example. That's one of the biggest themes that you see at the games made at camp. They're not just fun games. They have like a entertainment plus angle. So we've had anti-bullying games. We've had games that help you if you're special needs. We had a girl make a game for her brother who was special needs, and she was like, he loves dolphins and I just want to make something for him. So getting them to solve the problems that they see in the world, right? So 2 components: getting them the technical skills and the know-how and the confidence in being able to use that and do something with it. I think if we can equip kids with just these 2 things as they come out of school, they can really build the future that they envision on their own.
I wonder if we could unpack a little bit about overcoming stereotypes. You touched on that. I remember there was a study out of University of Surrey, I believe, that showed that girls who play video games are 3 times more likely to get STEM degrees than those who didn't. And you were talking about the kind of innovation you see happening in the courses and the curriculum that you teach about not only making fun games, but also having a mission behind it. And what are you seeing in terms of that confidence and overcoming stereotypes through Girls Make Games?
So unfortunately, stereotypes exist across all boards, and we do deal with a lot of negative stereotypes from many different angles. And the sad thing is stereotypes kind of feed themselves. So if I was a content producer and I believed in the stereotype that girls don't play games, I'm much less likely to make games that appeal to girls. And then I end up making a certain kind of game, and that demographic plays them, grows up to become developers, and the cycle just perpetuates. And I think we have been stuck in that cycle for some time, but we're breaking out of it. So at camp, really, what we end up doing, we don't even tell girls that, hey, we understand you're girls, and this is a predominantly male area, or like, the job statistics are 20%, things like that. We don't talk about any of that. The goal is to just get them excited and comfortable with getting their idea out in a game format. So we're talking about using technology to code and then design, because at the end of the day, a well-designed product is going to be an effective product. So talking about design and how you can create something that has the effect you want it to have. We talk about art. So that one always goes over really well. The aesthetic that you want and what kind of options are available to you. We talk about writing, because storytelling is really one of the oldest forms of media that exist, I guess. We talk about putting it all together and then working in a team. So as you work in a team, you're going to be growing up building different things with different sets of people that have all kinds of perspective that might be polar to you. How do you, come to a table, negotiate, and still build something that you're both proud and passionate about? So the skills that we end up focusing on, just naturally at the end of it, take away that stereotype of, I didn't know that girls played games, because at camp, there was nothing that talked about me being a girl. Really, the only difference about this camp was that everyone else there identified as a girl. And it's a surprise when they first walk in, but pretty much within a couple minutes, they forget that they're girls or they're surrounded by girls. It's all video games and all good fun and building something and just excited about building their game.
I have a question for each of you, and you can answer it in the way that makes the most sense from your perspective. There's a lot of conversation about public and private sector partnerships in advancing educational opportunity through STEAM education and maybe even through video games. And maybe I'll start with you, Chris, about your background in seeing how public and private partnerships can work collaboratively to enhance these educational, ultimately career opportunities in what you've seen.
Yeah, a number of my successes in my career have actually been through public and private partnerships. And what's interesting about them is it goes back to that almost a sense of flexibility, and truly partnership is key. So needing to adjust to the needs of both sides and not treating it like a vendor and customer relationship. As soon as you go into the vendor-customer relationship, it's I'm asking for this, you're trying to appease, you're not actually coming at it with some level of equal balance to it. So what I have found is that those relationships work best, whether or not it's private partner, whether or not it's with a school, whether or not it's federal or at state level, whatever it may be. When both people have a real stake in it and a real investment in the other's success and can play to the strengths. So sometimes procurement, for example, is a slower process when you're on the government side. There's all sorts of things that I can do in my role, but it is hard to just run to Staples and buy some paper. But on the private side, someone can just run to Staples and buy some paper. And if each side of it comes with their strengths, the things that they can do, you can really work some magic. And I'm really excited about the prospects where when we set those up correctly for what can be done.
Layla, what have you seen on your side in terms of public and private partnerships or various philanthropy efforts? Because your universe is so integrated into so many ecosystems. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way I like to think about it is the supply side and the demand side. We're here training the future workforce that's going to go join the industry. And at the same time, we're not the ones kind of housing this workforce, we're the intermediary. There's the education system, there's us, and then there's the industry. And I think we need a little bit of that bridging. So the more bridges that we can form, I see Girls Make Games as that bridge between the education world and the workforce and the industry. It's unfair to expect a middle school teacher to understand what kind of jobs will exist in the video game industry and in the tech world in the future. It's unfair to expect parents to understand and stay on top of it. When they were in college, the world looked different. By the time these kids graduate and come out, the world is going to look different. So the best thing that we can do really is to kind of stay on top of it, and like Chris was talking about, not build that vendor-customer relationship, but rather partnership. We are building the future together, and we have to get these kids ready for the future together. It might end up not being a one-place solution. Like, a lot of people come up to us and say, why girls only? We can't create solutions that work for everyone. Black Girls Code has its space. Girls Make Games has its place. We're all trying to do, what we can within our domains. And I think if we could find a way to kind of sit at the same table and maybe meet regularly and be like, what's going on in your world that we can collaborate on? So creating these avenues, and this is one of the reasons I love Games for Change, is it creates that avenue for people to come together and share what they're working on and problems that they're facing, and how we can partner to solve it together. So it will take everyone from nonprofits to companies to education, parents, kids themselves to come up with the solution. I don't think there's a one place that could do that.
I thought
one thing.
Go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just want to build on one thing that Leila had said, because I thought it's so important, which is in getting to this sort of the stereotype of games and sort of the branding of it. I almost wish we could just have another word, because to me, games are a medium. They're a way that you can engage and communicate. And therefore, if I think of the things that are parallel to that, a podcast, a video, a book, right? And I think games are the same in that sense. You can have a book that is teaching you a lot of things. You can have a book that really is just for fun. You can have a podcast that's teaching you something. You can have a podcast that's just for fun. I think you can have games that are teaching you all sorts of things about the real world, that are simulations. They're teaching you teamwork and how to communicate, and you're not lonely, and they're networking people, and how do you cooperate, and strategy. They can teach you about certain topic areas, whether or not that's about farming or building or constructing, all sorts of skill sets that they can teach you, just as you could learn from a book or a podcast or video. But there are some games out there that they're not trying to teach you as much. And I think game has just become overly synonymous with fun and sort of throwaway and not teaching you, almost the reverse of where books are so associated with teaching you things. Yeah. And I'd love to level the playing field and think of games much more as simulations. And as soon as you do that, we all know that simulations can teach you all sorts of things. And they are a great way to gain real world experience, to learn things that you might not otherwise be able to reach or engage in, except sort of going through the journey of life. And I know some of the best lessons I've learned in my life have been from games, whether or not those are video games or whether or not they are board games and such. And I just want to sort of give that voice and try to help elevate that a little bit and undo that sort of stereotyping to the degree that a moment on this panel can do that.
Well, I don't know if you'd call it the gerondification, but a lot of people are starting to say gamification, right, as the way of using games to stimulate the mind to learn other things. And so I see people trying to think of different ways of really pointing out that games do so much. So it's a point well taken in how we express this medium to be many things to many people. I thought we might close by asking how you see either technology or games being a nice vehicle for ensuring investments in a diverse workforce moving forward. And maybe Chris will start with you and later we'll go to you. Because in the work that you do, you're trying to elevate everyone, but you're also trying to ensure that there is equity. And part of your role now, Chris, is to look at educational equity. And so I wonder if you might talk about how technology might be used in that way, and then to you, Leila.
Yeah, I think, well, look, technology, what we're seeing all across all sorts of different industries and sectors is that technology is allowing for personalization where that wasn't able to happen before. So if you think back 50 years, in education, everyone had the same textbook, and you were trying to achieve equity through equality, meaning everyone the same thing. Where now I think technology can allow you to identify what it is that you want everyone to receive ultimately, but provide different pathways to get there. And for some, it might be not gamifying something. They might really like to learn in a very structured, traditional, teacher in front of a classroom kind of way. But then there are others who are going to like to learn from their peers. And sometimes that is going to be through a group project or through a game. There are others who want to engage more individually, and there are going to be different areas that might be interesting to them. I think what technology and games allows us to do is for the segment of the population, which I think is pretty large, that doesn't always find the traditional mode of school to be but so engaging for them, that games can find a way to engage them. Maybe not the whole day, but part of a day, or something that they are excited about, and also create appreciation. I know I've spent a lot of time doing mathematics instruction as well as science and early reading. But in math, I find that when you help someone learn to code, to figure out an algorithm, to do something on the screen, they understand, they have an appreciation for algebra, for example, that they never had before. So I think we need to look at games not only as a method for you to learn something directly, but also as a method for you to appreciate the lessons that you may be learning in another way, shape, or form. And I think technology allows for that potential differentiation, for different ways to engage, to bring different resources to different places. I'm not just excited about sort of traditional video games. I'm also very excited about the idea of bringing in more augmented reality or virtual reality into that space to be able to connect people to places they haven't been before and the people they haven't been before, and to engage in that sort of gamification of a lot of activities. That's what I'm really hopeful of, and hope we see a lot more advancement for in the coming years.
Layla.
So I think going with the theme of the talk about STEAM. So one of my favorite things about video games is how many different aspects it covers. You know, you've got your coding, you've got your art, music, writing, and then you have to put it all together in a format that's not just fun, but also meaningful to the player. And you're working in a team. So let's say at a camp, you're learning, you know, how to build something together. I feel like with video games, one of the things that we really need to start exploring is to not just think about the end product, but what each element is teaching us. By getting better at appreciating art and by getting better at appreciating music, we're enriching the lives of these students who are going to be building on all of these little blocks to solve the problems of the future. One of the things I like to talk to the kids about is, I know we tell you that the future is going to look like this and the future is going to look like that, but we're constantly wrong about what the future is going to be. We can only make so many predictions. The only thing that we can tell you is that technology is definitely going to be at the heart of it. So you need to be absolutely comfortable with technology. There is no reason any child in a developed country like the US should not have good access and good comfort and confidence with not just using, but also creating technology. So I keep going back to, you know, I know you like to draw, you know, we'll have kids who come in and be like, I only like art. Can someone else on my team code? Because I really don't want to do it. And I'm like, sorry, not an option. Everyone has to code. You can be the artist once you've figured out the coding, but everyone has to learn to code. This is really the bare minimum. And if we could show that and we could bring that into our education system where, you know, we're using games to get kids comfortable and confident with technology, as opposed to we're using games to teach them how to make games so they can become game developers. Because I think that kind of narrows that vision of what we're trying to do. Some of them will end up becoming game developers. It's very hard to fall out of this club once you're in it. Trust me, I've been trying. It's been 8 years. I'm still in it. And I really thought I would only be doing it for a couple of years. If they can walk away with that sense of I've got the confidence and I've got the skills, I think we will have achieved success. And I think video games offer such an easy out for everyone that I I really think that we should be looking at implementing it at an actual curriculum, school curriculum level, even nationally. So if there's any conversations or anyone who's listening to this talk working on that on like a national scale, please get in touch. We're Chris, Stan, and I were all games evangelists, and we're always looking to distribute curriculum and train people on how to spread the magic word. So yeah, thank you.
Well, Layla and Chris, I just want to thank each of you for your insights and for your inspiration and for the work that you do. I look forward to seeing how these initiatives take root and blossom in developing that next generation of innovators. And I also want to thank the folks at Games for Change for hosting this festival and this really important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan, Chris, and Layla. Now, everyone can join them for a Q&A and learn more about this conversation in just a few minutes. But before you do, the ESA and G4C have a couple of announcements for you. First, I'd like to share how excited I am that we will be extending our content partnership with the ESA to hold more events throughout the year. We will aim to continue the important conversations started here at G4C while building momentum about making the change in the world we want to see. So stay tuned about more programming from the two organizations later in the coming months. We also have another announcement from the ESA about their annual Essential Facts Report. This public-facing survey has grown into being a staple of the games industry and holds metrics and statistics that I personally reference in all of my speaking engagements. Stan is going to share now the latest information about the report. And then please make sure to join him and the team over in the Spark Q&A room immediately after.
Hi, I'm Stan Pierre-Louis, President and CEO of the Entertainment Software Association. The ESA serves as the voice and advocate for the U.S. video game industry. We are proud to be here at the 2021 Games for Change Festival and to announce the release of our annual Essential Facts Report on the state of the video game industry. Here's a quick rundown of this year's report. The 2021 edition of our Essential Facts Report represents a snapshot of the video game playing community in the United States following a year of social distancing. Although the country is starting to reopen, the pandemic has had and still has a profound impact on every aspect of our lives. As we all adapted to working, learning, and playing at home, people from all walks of life reached for video games to find joy, connection, and a sense of belonging when it was most needed. Today, there are nearly 227 million video game players in the United States. That's up from 214 million players a year ago. This year's report finds that 67% of US adults and 76% of those under 18 play video games at least once a week. 80% of video game players are over 18, and the average age of a player in the US is 31 years old. Across all ages, players are about half female and half male, about 45% and 55% respectively. Video games have the power to transcend background, nationality, and geography to bring us together to share in a common experience. And players agree. Nearly 90% of players say that video games can bring together people of different cultures, races, ages, and even political affiliations. They also agree that video games can create accessible experiences for people with different physical abilities. More than half of players say that video games help them stay connected to friends and family. And 42% of players say they've met a good friend, spouse, or significant other through video games. And it's easy to see why video games are so popular. 90% of players say that video games bring joy through play. They also say that games can inspire, provide mental stimulation, and relieve stress, which we've all really needed this past year. And video games help create connection and community. This year, more than 3/4 of players say they play video games with others, up from 2/3 last year. And playing together is a family affair, as 74% of parents play games with their children at least once a week. That's up from 55% in 2020. And total cooperative playtime is up nearly an hour since 2020. Not surprisingly, most of that increase in co-op playing comes from online play. With respect to the pandemic in particular, about half of players say they played more during this period, and most players say they'll continue playing even as the country opens up and as social distancing requirements start to subside. Video games are enjoyed by every demographic, but parents saw games as especially helpful for their children. 71% of parents report that video games were a much needed break for their children during the pandemic. Many families used video games as part of their education program last school year. Over half of parents say that their children used video games for educational purposes, with math being the most utilized genre. Overall, 3/4 of parents say that video games made their children's transition to distance learning easier. Everyone here at this year's festival knows that video games can serve as a positive influence on the world. I'm happy to be sharing this year's report with all of you and to highlight the breadth and diversity of the video game playing community. To learn more, visit our website at theesa.com. Thank you.